Right now, as you listen to this, your mind is processing reality in a way that 99% of people literally cannot understand. And that's not a compliment. It's a diagnosis of a different kind of consciousness. One that Carl Jung, one of the most important psychological thinkers of the 20th century, spent his life studying. According to Jung, these rare minds operate not just differently, but on a frequency that lies beyond ordinary awareness. A frequency most people can't even perceive, let alone comprehend. So if you've always felt like an outsider, like you're speaking a foreign language even in your native tongue, if conversations often feel like code switching between dimensions, or if you've spent your life trying to explain things no one else seems to see, sense, or care about, there's a reason. It's not because you're broken. It's because your mind may belong to the rare 1% Jung dedicated his career to understanding. These individuals don't just think. They synthesize. They don't just hear what's said. They decode what's unsaid. They don't just live in the world. They see the architecture underneath it. And Jung discovered that these rare minds share 8 unmistakable signs, patterns of thinking, feeling, and perceiving that defy ordinary cognition. And the 8th sign, it's the one that will change how you view yourself, not just as a person, but as a necessary piece in humanity's psychological evolution. So stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand whether your mind is not only rare, but part of a deeper current that connects consciousness itself. Jung called it the path of individuation. And if any of what I've just said feels eerily familiar, you may have already begun. Let's begin with the first sign. You don't think in straight lines. You think in dimensions. While most people process reality linearly, one piece of information at a time, your mind does something else entirely. You perceive layers. When someone speaks, you're not just hearing the words. You're tracking their tone. You're feeling their emotion. You're sensing their unconscious motivations, recalling patterns you've seen before, and simultaneously projecting potential outcomes into the future. You're not just listening. You're reading the symphony of their entire psyche. Carl Jung described this phenomenon as part of what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to bridge conscious and unconscious content in real time. In other words, your mind is not simply reacting to what's in front of you. It's weaving together instinct, intuition, history, and meaning, often in the blink of an eye. That's why casual conversations can be exhausting. Because for you, they're never casual. You're not just responding to what someone says. You're responding to who they are, to what they're hiding, to what their body language is betraying, to what their silence is screaming. When someone tells you, "I'm fine," you don't hear reassurance. You hear contradiction. The words don't match the micro-expressions, the forced smile, the tightening jaw, the shift in tone. You register the data stream beneath the surface, even when you don't want to, even when you try not to. You've likely found yourself predicting plot twists in movies, not because of obvious clues, but because you can feel the gravitational pull of the narrative structure. You sense where a story is going, because you see the archetypal patterns that shape it long before the average viewer catches on. You might even finish people's sentences, not because you're psychic, but because your mind has already mapped the trajectory of their thought. This is what I call dimensional processing. And it's more than intelligence. It's a kind of psychic multitasking that's as exhausting as it is extraordinary. Jung believed that minds like yours were naturally attuned to the symbolic and mythic layers of reality. That what others experience as disconnected moments, you experience as a web of meaning. And while that might sound poetic, it often creates a very real problem. People don't get you. They misread your depth as overthinking, your intuition as irrationality, your synthesis as distraction. They're tuned to a frequency that hears just the melody. You're hearing the entire orchestra. But there's something else Jung understood. The transcendent function doesn't just connect you to others, it connects you to yourself. It's the bridge between what you know and what you are becoming. And for people like you, that bridge is always active, always evolving, always sensing the next horizon. So if you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you just translated a foreign language while everyone else was reading subtitles, you're not crazy. You're not too sensitive. You're processing in dimensions they simply can't access. And that brings us to the second sign, one that explains why your entire reality feels symbolic, layered, and mythic. Because for you, thinking isn't linear. It's dreamlike. It's metaphorical. It's alive. Sign 2. You don't just understand metaphors, you think in them. Carl Jung believed that the deepest truths of the human psyche aren't expressed in literal language. They're revealed through symbols, myths, and images. He called this active imagination, a psychological process where the conscious and unconscious mind meet and converse. Not through words, but through archetypes. If dimensional processing allows you to read beneath the surface of conversation, then symbolic consciousness allows you to interpret reality itself as a kind of dream, alive with meaning. You're not simply observing events, you're translating them. You don't just see a traffic jam, you see a metaphor for societal overwhelm. You don't just hear a friend venting about work, you hear a story about their inner battle with authority, creativity, and self-worth. Your mind is constantly turning concrete experience into symbolic meaning. You live in metaphor because it's the only language wide enough to hold what you feel. Jung spent years exploring what he called the prospective function of the psyche, the idea that the unconscious is not just a storage unit of past traumas, but a compass for what wants to emerge. Your symbolic awareness gives you access to that compass. You don't just perceive what is, you sense what is becoming, what's trying to be born. This is why you're drawn to layered storytelling, films, books, and music that feel like they speak directly to your soul. It's why ancient myths, religious imagery, or psychological symbolism hit you in a way others brush off as abstract. It's not abstraction to you. It's the most real thing there is. But here's the problem. Most people are stuck in literalism. They only see what's in front of them. So when you try to express something symbolic, I don't know why, but this feels like winter inside me, or that dream meant something I can't explain. They look at you like you're being dramatic or vague. You're not being vague. You're speaking the language of the unconscious. You're fluent in a dialect most people have forgotten how to hear. Symbolic consciousness isn't a communication problem. It's a psychological gift. But it often makes you feel like you're dreaming while others are awake. Or worse, like they're asleep while you're awake in the dream. And that symbolic fluency leads directly into the third sign of a rare mind. One that most people find uncomfortable, even disturbing. Sign 3. You are drawn to the shadow. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In other words, true growth doesn't come from pretending to be perfect. It comes from owning everything you are, especially the parts you were taught to hide. If you have a rare mind, you are likely deeply curious about the hidden, repressed, and denied aspects of human nature. not in a voyeuristic or morbid way, but because you understand something others don't. The darkness isn't evil, it's information. This is what Jung called shadow integration, the psychological process of acknowledging and understanding the unconscious parts of the self that society often labels bad, dark, or unacceptable. Most people split their psychology into neat binaries: good versus bad, light versus dark, right versus wrong. You see through that illusion. You recognize that every light casts a shadow, and every shadow holds a truth. You want to know why people hurt each other, not just that they do. You're drawn to true crime stories not for the shock value, but for the insight into fractured psyches. You're intrigued by morally complex characters, philosophical dilemmas, taboo conversations. Because to you, understanding the whole human experience requires going into the places most people avoid. Jung called this psychological maturity. And he knew it scared people. Because facing the shadow means facing what you are capable of. It means acknowledging that the villain and the hero often live in the same person. You've probably been called too intense or too dark for asking uncomfortable questions. But the truth is, you're not dark. You're complete. Because here's what Jung discovered. Until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. Your fascination with the shadow is not a flaw. It's a sign that you're trying to take responsibility for your wholeness. You want to see it all, feel it all, integrate it all. Because you intuitively know, only then can you be free. So while others are busy pretending to be one-dimensional saints, you're diving into the full spectrum truth of what it means to be human. And that truth can be terrifying, but it's also the only path to real healing. Sign 4. You feel homesick for a place that doesn't exist. Carl Jung described the human journey of psychological growth as individuation, the process of becoming a whole, unified self by integrating both conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche. For most people, this process is barely conscious, but for rare minds, it's not optional. It's an ache, a drive, a pull from something deeper than the ego. If you resonate with this, then you've likely experienced what I call existential homesickness. It's the feeling that you're somehow not at home in this world, not because you're lost, but because you remember something deeper, something truer, something more real than the surface-level chatter, roles, and routines of everyday life. You can be in a room full of people, smiling, laughing, fitting in, and still feel like the only member of your species. It's not loneliness in the social sense. It's a deeper kind of isolation, a sense that your consciousness is tuned to a frequency that others can't hear, that the conversations that pass for connection often leave you hungrier than before. Jung called this psychological isolation, not a pathology, but a symptom of expanded awareness. When your consciousness evolves beyond conventional roles and collective expectations, there's a period where you feel like you're floating in between worlds. You've outgrown the shallows, but you haven't yet found your tribe in the depths. This is why books, music, and art often feel like truer companions than people. Because they speak symbolically. Because they ask better questions. Because they don't require you to shrink yourself just to be understood. You're not depressed. You're not broken. You're just attuned to something deeper. And that depth is sacred, because it's pointing you toward the real journey, not outward toward approval, but inward toward authenticity. Jung believed that this homesickness is not something to escape. It's something to honor. It's the soul's way of calling you back to yourself. And when you answer that call, you begin to see through the surface of human behavior, not as a critic, but as a kind of archaeologist of the psyche. Sign 5. You see the wounds behind the mask. To most people, behavior is behavior. Someone is rude, they're just a jerk. Someone is distant, they must not care. But if you have a rare mind, you don't stop at the behavior, you start digging. This is what I call psychological archaeology, and it's rooted in Carl Jung's analytical psychology. Jung believed that symptoms, patterns, and even dysfunctional behaviors are not random. They're expressions of unconscious conflict, signals from the psyche that something deeper is unresolved. And your mind is wired to pick up on those signals. You don't just notice that someone is being inauthentic, you sense why. You feel the fear behind the facade, the childhood wounds hiding behind the perfectionism, the buried grief behind the sarcasm. You see through the armor people wear and into the war they're fighting inside. It's not that you're trying to psychoanalyze everyone. It just happens, automatically, constantly. You hear not just what people say, but how they say it, their tone, their breath, their body language. Micro-expressions that contradict the words, pauses that reveal more than statements. You're not just listening to a person. You're reading their entire psychological ecosystem. Jung called this intuitive perception, the ability to perceive psychological fields around others. And while that sounds mystical, it's very real. It's why strangers confide in you. Why people say things like, "I don't know why I'm telling you this." It's why you walk away from social interactions feeling drained, because you didn't just exchange words. You absorbed emotion. You held space. You witnessed a soul beneath a persona. But here's the burden. Seeing behind the mask doesn't always make you feel closer. Sometimes it makes you feel lonelier. Because while others are content with the performance, you're aware it's a performance. And you long for authenticity, like a starving man craves food. I see the person beneath the mask. That may be your silent mantra, but it can be a heavy one. Still, Jung believed that those who carry this kind of perceptual gift are bridges between the conscious and unconscious, between the persona and the self. You are not just noticing pain. You are honoring it, translating it, making it speak. And in a world addicted to surface appearances, that is an act of quiet revolution. Sign 6. You think in paradox. Carl Jung once wrote, "The more conscious you become, the more you realize you don't know." It wasn't false humility. It was psychological truth. Because rare minds don't just tolerate contradiction, they recognize it as a core feature of reality. Most people crave certainty, clear categories, simple answers, good versus evil, right versus wrong. They want one box to check, one truth to hold, one side to take. But if you're one of the rare ones, you see the complexity hiding in everything. You think in spectrums, not absolutes. You know that light and dark coexist in every person. That strength often emerges from vulnerability. That healing requires facing pain, not avoiding it. Jung called this paradoxical thinking, the capacity to hold opposing truths without forcing a resolution. And he considered it one of the highest forms of psychological maturity. You understand that a person can be both selfish and generous, often in the same breath. That an emotion like anger might hide sadness. That truth often lies not in the extremes, but in the tension between them. Your mind doesn't need everything to make clean, logical sense, because you recognize that the psyche isn't mechanical. It's symbolic, mythic, alive, And this drives people crazy. You've probably been told, just pick a side. Or, you're overcomplicating it? Maybe they've accused you of being wishy-washy. But you're not confused. You're nuanced. You see the mosaic where others see a wall. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to integrate opposites into a higher synthesis. And when you think this way, you're not avoiding truth. You're deepening it, letting it breathe, letting it unfold. But paradox is threatening to the ego. It shatters black and white illusions. It demands humility. And that's rare. That's why your insights often land with discomfort. They challenge simplicity. They break open tightly held narratives. And in doing so, they create space for deeper conversation, for genuine understanding, for psychological wholeness. You're not indecisive. You're integrated. You're not vague. You're visionary. You think in the language of the soul, and the soul speaks in paradox. And that very way of thinking leads into something even more profound, something that affects every person you meet, whether you realize it or not. Sign 7. Your presence transforms people. Carl Jung famously wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But what happens when one of those personalities carries the energy of transformation itself? This is what I call catalytic consciousness. And it's not something you do. It's something you are. If you have a rare mind, you've probably noticed something strange. People open up to you quickly. Casual conversations suddenly become deep. Strangers confess things they've never told anyone. Some people feel magnetically drawn to you. Others become defensive, irritated, even hostile for reasons you can't explain. What's happening here isn't random. Jung discovered that individuals who begin the individuation process, who integrate their shadow, live symbolically, and embrace psychological wholeness, begin to radiate what he called individuation energy. And this energy unconsciously stirs something in others. It activates their own buried potential. It wakes up the parts of them that have been asleep. And not everyone wants to wake up. That's why your presence can trigger people. You don't try to change them, but they begin to change. Or they resist it. Some people will be drawn to you like they've found a mirror. Others will push you away because your depth threatens their carefully constructed identity. You're not causing conflict. You're revealing it. You're not making them feel something. You're unlocking what was already there. And this can be a lonely path. Because while you may catalyze growth in others, it doesn't always mean you'll be understood, appreciated, or welcomed. You might be the turning point in someone's life and still be left behind as they continue their journey. But Jung saw this too. He called individuals with this pattern wounded healers, those who transform their own suffering into wisdom, and in doing so, help others heal themselves. You don't need a title, a therapist's couch, or a degree to do this. You just need to be you, fully, authentically, present. Because your wholeness challenges fragmentation. Your clarity confronts denial. Your depth reveals what others are running from. You're not trying to change the world. You're just embodying the truth of who you are. And in doing so, you become a mirror that others can't look away from. Sign 8. You are not just growing, you are evolving. For most people, personal development is something they dabble in. They want to improve, adjust, maybe fix a few things. But if you have a rare mind, change isn't a choice. It's a compulsion, a calling, a fire in your soul that refuses to be ignored. Carl Jung called this individuation, the process by which a person becomes a psychological individual, a separate, indivisible unity or whole. It's not about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. And for rare minds, this is not a hobby or self-help trend. It is a psychological imperative, as vital as breathing. This is what I call evolutionary consciousness, and it's the eighth and most profound sign. You don't just want to improve. You want to transform, to shed false layers, to burn down the illusions, to rebuild yourself again and again until what's left is real, essential, undeniable. You are drawn to breakdowns because somewhere deep inside, you know they precede breakthroughs. You feel restless when life becomes too stable, too predictable, too comfortable, because your soul knows that comfort can become a cage. You seek out teachings, mentors, initiations. You're willing to face your own darkness, not because it's easy, but because you understand that the only way out is through. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And you're doing just that, not because it's pleasant, but because you've realized that the only thing more terrifying than that is living your entire life as someone you're not. But here's where it gets truly profound. Your evolution is not just for you. Jung believed that individuated consciousness contributes to the collective unconscious, that the psychological growth of one person feeds into the evolution of humanity itself. So your transformation, it's not selfish, it's sacred, it ripples outward, it matters. You are becoming what doesn't yet exist in the world. You are walking a path that others haven't paved. You are carrying the torch of psychological wholeness, not just for yourself, but for the future. And that is why your mind feels so rare. Because it is. So let's step back. You see reality in dimensions, processing words, emotions, and archetypes all at once. You think in symbols, not because you're confused, but because metaphors are more accurate than facts. You're drawn to the darkness, not to indulge it, but to integrate it. You feel homesick, not for a place, but for a state of being that most have never touched. You dig beneath behavior, uncovering pain, pattern, and potential. You embrace paradox, living in the space between black and white. You transform people, not with force, but with presence. And you evolve, because your soul refuses to do anything less. These are not quirks. They are signatures. They are the signs of a rare mind. A mind that Carl Jung recognized as essential to human progress. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not hard to understand. You are what happens when consciousness expands. And yes, it can feel lonely, alienating, exhausting. But you are not alone. There is an invisible community of minds like yours, scattered across the globe, asking the same questions, sensing the same depth, walking the same path of inner transformation. You may not see them every day, but they exist, and they are listening, just like you are right now. So the next time you wonder if your mind is too complex, too sensitive, too intense, remember, you're not difficult, you're different. And your different mind is not a barrier, it's a doorway to depth, to truth, to wholeness. Not just for you, but for anyone courageous enough to follow. The world needs your rare mind. Jung knew this, and now, so do you. If this resonated with you, if you saw yourself in these 8 signs, consider subscribing or sharing this with someone else who might need to hear it. Sometimes, the most individuated act is helping another person recognize their own psychological uniqueness. Your journey has already begun. Welcome to the 1%, and thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.